We want to welcome back U.S. International, Chivas USA defender and host of the Jimmy Conrad podcast show. Jimmy Conrad, thanks for being our fifth returning guest on the Straight Red Card.
You know, it's always an honor to be involved with you guys. I think if we could somehow hold hands, you know, metaphorically, that would be something I would like to do. Maybe even grab your ass.
Yeah. Well, they're working on that digitally, I hear. It's like a pair of goggles or something. Unfortunately, Brett won't be joining us. He's busy involved in an 8th Division club team game, and that's no bust on you, Brett. I'm just kidding. Just pulling his leg.
I understand where I fall on his totem pole, so I tell him I appreciate that.
Well, he is kind of the star of the team, so, you know, he was an all-state striker. So
what did you say they were, under 10s? Is that what you said?
No, actually, you know, in high school, Brett did pretty well. He was an all-state player, and had he actually pursued something in college, who knows what would have happened. But things were different back then. So
he could have been playing in yesterday's game. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We could have used him.
Yeah, a few pounds less, maybe. And all right, we won't bust on Brett anymore. He's not even here to defend himself. But I just want to let's hop right to this Gold Cup stuff, and the game versus Mexico yesterday. A lot of people last night after the game, notably Christopher Sullivan and even Carlos Bocanegra in his interview, seemed to say that, you know, once Cherundolo went out with that injury, the defense simply sort of lost cohesion, its connectiveness. It simply started to slowly crack and leak as if, you know, maybe it hit a big Mexican iceberg. Is that how you saw it too?
Well, I think obviously Steve Cherundolo was my best player in the tournament for the U.S. all the way through.
Yeah,
he's so steady. Yeah, he's so steady. He knows where to go. He knows where to be. He knows how to communicate and get the most out of the guy that's in front of him and around him. So, yeah, obviously it was a big loss. It's just disappointing for me that we couldn't plug somebody else into the system and not miss a beat. You know, that way there's that much of a drop off, and that our captain is noting that after the game.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that doesn't say a lot about, you know, who we're bringing off the bench.
Yeah.
You know, obviously, Johnny Bornstein is public enemy number one for a lot of fans, but, you know, you got thrown into a situation where we could argue you probably shouldn't even been on the roster, you know, based on Bob Bradley's standard of people playing for their club teams.
Yeah.
You know, he shouldn't even have been included. So, you know, it's really not fair to him. He's played 200 club minutes in the last 6 months, and to throw him into a game like that.
Exactly, and most of them have not been at left back. I mean, he's been playing in the midfield in Mexico, and so that makes it even more complex. But hindsight is 2020, of course. But a lot of people were asking last night, and I think it was Kyle Martino who said it first, and that is when Dolo was coming off. My first thought, and maybe I'm not trying to, you know, pump up my own thinking skills here, but my first thought was leave Lehigh where he was and put Spector on the right back, even though Spector hasn't played very well lately either. But at least he's been in the big games in the Confederations Cup. He has some sort of history, and it would have, I think, made things a little more stable. Maybe it's unfair, but, you know, that's 2020, right?
Right, of course. I think, I mean, I'm sure most of us would argue after the fact as well that we prefer to have a 50% Steve Cherundolo on than an out-of-form Jonathan Bornstein, you know. So, you know, it's unfortunate. You know, you never want to isolate one player in situations. Obviously, there's more to when a goal's scored than just what you see right before it's scored. I mean, there's, you know, a couple passes that happened to it, maybe some space that got broke down somewhere else. So I don't think our midfield did us any favors either. It seemed even before we'd gone up 2-0, you know, Chicharito had a few chances. We already looked a bit vulnerable, even when Steve Cherundolo was on the field. So, you know, whether he would have stayed on, I just don't see us winning that game, to be honest. I mean, we scored a great goal. Both goals that we scored were very good. But I just don't know if it was going to be enough to slow down the Mexicans, because once they went down 2-0, they didn't seem as vulnerable as they had in the past. They seemed like they still had some belief that they still could make it happen against us.
Yeah.
And a lot of that was indicative from the first 20 minutes of their play. They created enough chances to score goals. They just didn't at that point.
Yeah, and you made a good point about the midfield, because I think, we can blame it all on poor Jonathan Bornstein, but in the end as well, it seemed like the defensive help from the midfield seemed to be breaking down as well.
Yeah, obviously when you're down 3-2 and you're chasing the game a little bit, it's hard to really judge players so much because it's more situational. But when the game's even, or when we're up and we're taking risks that we maybe don't need to do, we're trying to cover ground for other players. I think Michael Bradley and Jermaine Jones have a tendency to maybe get caught out of position trying to make plays, and one of their strengths is also their weaknesses, because sometimes when they do take those chances, they do end up, nipping something, breaking up a play, and starting the counterattack the other way. So it's hard to get too mad at them for that's something they're very good at, which is sniffing out dangerous situations. But at the same time, it makes us very vulnerable in our back four when we do lose a guy like Cherundolo. I mean, you lose somebody like that who is steady, then you really need one of your defensive midfielders to hold it together, be the glue that kind of keeps all the stuff in place. And I think Jermaine Jones and Michael both have a tendency to maybe get caught trying to sniff out stuff, and I think it caught us yesterday in yesterday's game. Yeah,
at least a couple times that I can remember in particular. But is it possible that Jonathan Spector just wasn't looking that good in training and leading up to the match, and that he was pretty much, not even a thought for Bob Bradley?
It seemed that way. I don't even know. Was he even in the 18? I don't even know.
That's what I was trying to find today. Yeah, I couldn't find it anywhere.
I'm pretty sure that the 18, I know against Panama in the semis, I think in Jamaica in the quarters, they didn't have, Spector wasn't in the 18. So I'm not quite sure. For the most part, I try to keep my finger on the pulse, and I'll text a few of my friends on the team. But this time I just let him be. I wasn't trying to look for any extra scoop. And so I'm sure there's a lot of fill-in-the-blank stuff. Who's to say he didn't go in and say something to Bob and maybe rub them the wrong way, and who knows? There's a lot of speculation out there that we could definitely play up. I'm starting a rumor right now, so hopefully that gets some legs, and we'll go from there.
I'll make it the headline of this show.
Sweet, appreciate it. Conrad says Spector has a fallout with Coach Bradley.
I'll work on that. So we'll. We're kind of starting with the bad news, and I don't want to just continue on with it, but let's talk a little bit more about it before we get to the good news, because there's some good news to dig out of this. But you look at the depth of the Mexican team last night. They lost two of their defensive starters, and they got better in the back. They didn't get worse. So whereas we dropped off significantly, our Achilles heel seems to be, as we go forward, that there's sort of a depth gap, if you will, is that something that we're going to have to close with the Mexican team if we plan on closing the gap in general with them?
Well, I think you can look back. We had a pretty good class of guys: Landon Donovan and DeMarcus Beasley and Oguchi Onweyu, and that class of guys that the Mexicans couldn't touch.
Yeah.
And that won us a lot of games, and that made us the battle rival for a long time, and now I just think it's their turn. They just have a generation of guys that are probably just a little bit better than ours, and so it's hard to read into that. I think it just kind of comes in waves. Yep. Hopefully, I'd assume the next time around we're going to have the next crop of guys that's going to be a little bit better than theirs.
Yeah.
So, we definitely have some deficiencies.
Yeah.
I think that was evidenced by one getting beat by Spain. And everybody's going to get beat pretty good handily by Spain, but it just kind of really highlights what you're not good at.
Right.
And then we go into the tournament not feeling good about ourselves and really not taking care of the competition like we should have through the group stage. And then, I thought we played really well against Jamaica, and that's how we should have been playing throughout the whole tournament. Played okay against Panama, and then just, maybe had a good 20 minutes against Mexico. But for me, there was really never any signs that we were in control of that game. It just seemed like we countered. And when we absorbed. And I just feel like we've done enough over the last 10, 12 years to go toe-to-toe with Mexico that we don't have to sit back and treat them like they're Spain.
Yeah.
We can come at them a little bit. And obviously, we've proven over the years that our best tactic is to counterattack against the Mexicans and frustrate them. But I just thought they were penetrating us in areas that they usually didn't do, and they were finding gaps. And that's a credit to them for having guys like Chicharito and Dos Santos who can make difference and are difference makers.
Yeah. How good is this group of Mexican players, really, without sounding treasonous in any way? But they looked pretty fantastic yesterday.
Yeah, I think the Mexican community has been waiting for Dos Santos to become this player for a number of years. You know, I remember the last Gold Cup. I mean, he was okay, and I remember him scoring against us in the final, but he wasn't the guy that we just saw yesterday. And so, you know, I think he's been maturing. I think we could argue that Freddie Adu is kind of our, you know, poor man's version of Dos Santos, who's starting to mature and it looked like, you know, he could be a player and that he can make a difference in a big game. So, you know, there's some bright spots for us, but we have some stuff. We have, you know, defensively, like you said, we don't really have a guy that's a straight-up leader. And the guys that are leaders are getting a little bit older. I mean, are they really going to be the guys we're going to count on in 2014? It's hard to say. And so there's a lot of question marks. It's a fun time, to be honest. And I think people should look upon it as a challenge, more of a positive than a woe is me. I think this is a time of, you know, we need to address on some weaknesses. How are we going to revamp the system to make that happen?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I actually, you know, of course, everybody feels after the loss, your gut is kind of in the wrong place. But, you know, there are some positives. And one of them, which I thought was really interesting, and you've been a part of these head-to-heads with Mexico before, so I want to get your thought on it. I noticed a lot more respect yesterday between the two teams, regardless of the rivalry. And yes, there were some moments where it got kind of sketchy, but obviously Dempsey is a teammate of Salcido's. He also knows Chicharito from the English Premier League, who also knows Howard, and Marquez is familiar with Donovan. And, you know, where in the past the Mexican teams would get down and if they started to lose, they'd begin to scoff and then they'd foul foolishly. And, you know, this time they just played soccer and they were really genuinely happy about winning this game. It wasn't kind of that nose in the air thing where they say, well, of course we beat this team. You know, they were actually really excited about it. So, I mean, are you noticing a little bit? I mean, there's kind of a dynamics change in these, to me at least, it seemed last night. I hope I'm not alone. An attitudinal change in the rivalry.
Well, I'd always noticed when we played that the pressure that it looked like the Mexican players had was less to do with the rivalry and more from the fact that their fans demanded that they beat the U.S.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, I think it got built up in the media a little bit, and I think a lot of the old guard of the Mexican players, Borghetti, Blanco, had a little bit more of that attitude and cockiness about the whole rivalry. But now, like you said, and the relationships that are being built between the two teams, a lot of those walls are being broken down, and it's not as real as the media might want to paint it. So, but it's just a matter of time before the respect became equal, and that they were genuinely happy that they beat us. And I'm sure there's still an angle of that's, you know, them feeling a sense of relief that they produced a good result and played in an exciting way against their biggest rivals, and that you know, they made the fans happy. So. I mean, the rivalry still exists, don't get me wrong, but I just don't think it's as heated and as bloodthirsty as people make it out to be. And
I think a lot of Mexican fans as well, especially Mexican-American fans who have this sort of torn allegiance, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it. They're going to, most of them will pull for Mexico, and then, of course, you know, prior to that, they might pull for the United States, and we saw that in the crowd. I mean, at least based on some of my friends who were there at the game, that's what they told me. So we're kind of, I think, I'm not going to call it a friendly rivalry, but I think it's much more respect rather than you're the lowly United States and we're Mexico and we've been dominating CONCACAF for so long that you need to just sort of suck it up, USA, because you're lesser than we are.
Well, yeah, I mean, we slapped them around there for a few years, you know, after the 2002 World Cup when we beat them in a real competition. And then not only that, we consistently beat them for a while. You know, I just think that's, after a while, I mean, the fans that grew up with that maybe were 10 or 11 at the time that are now, you know, 19, 20, 21, it's just not as much history there for them. They always just assume that when we played on U.S. soil, the U.S. would win. We played Mexican soil, the Mexicans would win. So, you know, we have to go back to the generation prior to that where they just assume we should beat them every time. And I'm sure that still exists, but like I said, we're breaking down all those old walls that stood up, and now I think it's going to be a rivalry that's not necessarily friendly. I mean, there's still, you know, something there that we want to prove, but I just don't think it's as crazy as people make it out.